That's there's also stigma, which is so crazy. There's a stigma to Al-Anon.
Of course there is. Yeah.
And it's you hear people say these jokes, these harmful jokes in our own in various fellowships, in 12 steps about jokes about Al-Anon, and Al-Anon has saved families' lives.
Oh, yeah.
And I know it's easy to make fun of the I don't know why, but Al-Anon is an amazing fellowship. I'll just tell you a quick story. I used to tell my parents it cost $10 to go to meetings. And when my mother started going to Al-Anon, she found out that wasn't the case. And to be honest, I don't know this time, had I gotten sober, my mother giving me $10 a day, I would have gone out and gone to the bodega and got booze. That she gave me they gave me 2 tokens to get to meetings and $1.50. And Al-Anon really helped save my family's life.
Right. It takes what it takes. You know what I mean? And it's frustrating, and it hurts like hell to watch somebody continue on that, especially once you've gotten a solution. You know what I mean? I went through this treatment center back in Portland, Maine, Mercy Hospital, Mercy Recovery Center, and I went through there 8 times, and I was trying to get in a 9th time. And the director of the program had my file in front of him, and he said, you've been through this program 8 times. And I said, yeah, I know. And he said, does that tell you anything? And I said, yeah, it tells me you guys suck. I'm like, I wish you'd get this right, because I'm dying over here, But it was the same thing it had always been. I wanted somebody else to fix me.
Right.
You know what I mean? And until I was ready, and I had nowhere else to go and no one else to blame, then I started to take that step.
We had a discussion. We had Bob Forrest in here last week, and Bob comes from a point of view of that people have to basically get to the point where they decide you just can't drink and you just can't use. And you got to start there.
I think that, for me, that's kind of that's where I hit. Like, I always feel like such a wimp compared to Amy and Felon, in my story. I'm like,
me too.
I drank and then I hurt somebody's feelings, and so I decided to get sober. Like, that's kind of my story. The last time, one of the last times I drank, I did the wimpiest thing, but I'll tell you really briefly. It's the wimpiest story, but it actually hurt my own feelings enough that I hurt somebody else's feelings, in a way that I thought was probably bigger than it ever really was. But the last time I drank, I was out and I had no money. And I always, even if I had no money, I knew I could get drunk. I'd go out, I'd find somebody, meet somebody nice, somebody fun or whatever, friendly to the bartender or whatever, buddy up to the bartender, and they'd be like, what do you want? Like, oh, it's on me kind of thing. I would always wiggle my way into a situation like that. And this last time, that day I had said, I just got to clean out my system for a couple weeks. And that night I was at a bar getting free drinks from my roommate's boyfriend, who was a bartender at this Asian restaurant. So I went there, started to get drunk, and then I went to another restaurant, met this guy, never met him before. He was a gay guy, and we became best friends instantly. Then that night he came back to my place, nothing funny like that, but just like we were really chummy. And we ended up getting just wasted together. And turns out he was friends with my brother's roommate in San Francisco. He wanted to call them and say hello. Wow. So it was 2 a.m. And I'm trying to make this short, but anyway. So I call there, and my brother's roommate answers, not the one that he wants to speak to. And he starts talking crap about this guy that I've made new friends with that night. And so I was on the phone talking to him, playing both sides. This guy he doesn't like is right there. And I just felt horrible about it. The next day, I'm so hungover, and I get a phone call. And the guy on the phone, I thought it was the guy in San Francisco that was talking crap about my new friend. It was my new friend that called me, but I didn't know that, and I was just too still wasted to know that. And I said, I can't believe all that stuff you were saying last night about da-da-da. And he was like, do you know who this is? And I was like, no. And I go, hold on a second. I didn't know what to do, so I just hung up the phone. And after that, he kept calling back. And I was so mortified, because I was up until that moment, I always thought, I took pride in myself that I'm a good human being. I really look out, I'm a nice friend, and this is so wimpy, and I felt so horrible about myself. And that was the time. I know Fallon's rolling his eyes over there.
I was never that bad.
I know, right? That was the weekend that I had the 3-day hangover, because I had used so much that, and I hurt this guy's feelings. I know it's so stupid.
He and I do that kind of stuff sober all the time.
I know, but you know what? It was I had slowly deteriorated deteriorated. Like as a human being, like I just started to feel just emotionally filthy. And it wasn't that, I probably could have, my liver probably could have taken it a while longer, but emotionally filthy, I just couldn't do it anymore.
Well, I think he's raising a huge point right now with what you're talking about, because I hear this all the time about bottoms. And I got sober in a few different types of meetings in New York. I got sober in one meeting where people lost a house, but they still had another house. So their financial bottom, it's not about financial bottoms. It's about spiritual, like it talks about spiritual, incomprehensible demoralization. Spiritually, I was dead. And whatever gets you to that spiritual bottom is your bottom. It has nothing to do with, how much drugs you did or the losses. It's where you are spiritually and mentally.
See, felon.
I think for every addict and alcoholic, there's a different reason.
Right. No, without a doubt.
Yeah, but you know what? Physically, I would say at least 80% of us in recovery physically could have continued. It's the unmanageability that drove us into recovery. You know what I mean?
If we could manage, none of us would be here.
Exactly.
And that's variable person.
I tend to
we
see,
wouldn't be alcoholics if we could manage.
I tend to see a lot of situations where people finally got to the point where there was something really important to them that they were going to lose.
Right.
Be it their health, be it a family member, they won't talk to them anymore.
Or yourself.
Be it something inside them, self-respect. There's something that they lose, and they're scared of losing that forever, or they're scared they're about to lose it, and that makes them decide to make a change.
Well, you know what? Prison was not my bottom.
Right? Well, you seem to enjoy prison.
Yeah.
I had a fun time in prison. And
You're like the Shawshank, the walls became your friends.
I was successful in prison.
Yeah.
Right. You know what I mean?
You were the compliant client in
I
prison.
had done enough time. I knew the system. I could manipulate the system. I was the go-to guy. I would run the tier, and I was successful.
You had respect.
You put me on the streets, and I'm sitting in the corner sticking needles in my arm.
Which is what we were discussing last week, which is a part of the problem with the rehab system and the outpatient is they don't get you ready for life. So you have a bunch of people that get out of rehab or get out of a sober, and they're like, oh, my God, I was good in sober living. I was good in rehab, and I know how to stay sober there. What do I do when I get out?
Right. So prison became my solution.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But my bottom was I just couldn't even laugh anymore. I couldn't even enjoy life. That was my bottom. It wasn't getting locked up. I didn't care about that. You know what I mean? And so I think Ian has a good point. It's different for everybody.
Right.
What are you guys whispering about?
Sweet little nothings into...
Yeah, I feel that, like, just hearing other people's stories, sometimes I feel a little wimpy. But now, like, I mean, I do agree. I agree with that. But
Ian, you had to come out twice.
I
Don't
really
feel wimpy.
I think Ian's lucky. I mean, there's a lot of people that have gone through treatment at my treatment center, and some have had horrific stories, and some have had very minimal stories. And I think sometimes people really think that you do have to just be over the top,
right,
a mess to get sober, and I don't think that's true. I think there's a lot of people that mature out of substance abuse.
Well, I also think that, like, this is my 18 years. This is my third try in 18 years. Amy and I sort of joke about this, but it took me 3 tries to get 18 years. A day at a time. So it wasn't just that one night. I felt bad about myself, and I was like, I can't drink anymore.
Right.
It was this is my third try.
Well,
at this,
that's a good point, and I just want to say that Alcoholics Anonymous or any other 12-step program does not corner the market on relapse. Because I hear people in the halls all the time say, I've never relapsed. Well, if you woke up one morning and promised yourself you're never going to drink again and drank again, guess what? You relapsed. You know what I mean? You don't have to be in a 12-step program to relapse.
Well, and I also love it because my sponsor is very fond of saying, the book was written by relapsers. That the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous was written by people that could not stay sober.
Yeah. Well, but they were not low-bottom drunks. They were late-stage alcoholics, but they were not low-bottom drunks.
Well, Bill was a little bit of a low-bottom drunk at that point, I guess. Not Dr. Bob was still a doctor.
But they still had homes.
Right.
They still had
you're
careers. Right. In fact, Bill W. tried working with all the street bums and failed miserably the first 6 months until he met Dr. Bob. So they weren't They weren't low bottom drunks. They were late stage alcoholics. There's a big difference.
And what I think is amazing, though, that you guys being in here, is that it does take it's so many different types, and I think that's the beauty and the spirit of the 12 steps, is that no matter where you come from, no matter what your background, we all get along.